Hi, good morning. Ed here from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and thanks for tuning in. So here we go again, another small pond reline and redesign. If you followed my channel last week, I was redoing a cascade, and I'm now doing some similar kind of work on this little pond here. So as always, lots to get on with. I'm going to start to unload all of my kit and start to dismantle all of the pond surround. If my t-shirt looks a bit funny, it's because I'm testing out a remote mic on this setup. Hopefully sound quality will be much improved in my future videos. I got fed up with the wind noise on the last load, so yeah, this looks a little bit odd. Right, let's start the work. Stonework has been removed, pond liner has been taken out, and the fleece, which was quite a struggle, has been removed as well. And I think there were two main issues with water loss on this pond. One was there was an old a piece of damage, a hole to the original pond liner that had been repaired, but over the years that repair had degraded and started to come away. But also the roots from this lovely acer beside the pond, you can see here, had found a passage into the pond and has been using the pond as a nice water source. And of course the pond fleece, being quite fibrous, allows all of the roots in the surrounding areas to sort of cling on to. So it was quite a mission to get that pulled out, but that's been done. So now we're down to the bare earth, the bare bones of the pond. And this is where I start to shape and to excavate. So I need to define the edges of the pond a little more. So I've been working my way around and just defining a bit of a curve around the back here. And I'm going to start to dig down to this level here, all the way round, to create that uniform level shelf onto which the stonework is going to sit. This area here is a nice large shallow shelf which will end up becoming almost a beach area. I think will look quite nice. It's getting a bit warm for this, and this wireless mic is going to allow you to hear all my puffs and moans and groans. Actually, it wasn't until I started watching back these videos that I realised how much I do puff and moan, and I've no idea why. Thankfully, the ground under the pond liner has been saved from getting baked hard like the rest of the ground around here. So until I get over to the acer, where the roots are, digging shouldn't be too much of an issue. I love working in the sort of awesome clay area. A lot of people complain about digging in clay. I think it's much nicer digging in clay than a loose material, especially when you're sculpting and shaping a pond, as it creates quite a nice stable surface on which to do stuff, and you can create a lovely neat shaped mould when you're excavating. So I'm going to carry on getting this dug out, and hopefully it will start taking shape. And here we have the finished excavation. So I've removed a reasonable quantity of earth in the process of forming and shaping the excavation for the pond and making sure that the shelving, etc. is all level. You can see the increase in depth. I've gone down about another sort of 8 to 10 inches in depth, and now the pond level is going to be able to maintain its maximum depth. Will be increasing the overall depth and volume of the pond quite significantly. The ground is still reasonably damp under that liner, so it's firmed itself nicely, which is good. So now I need to do the usual measure up and start thinking about sourcing materials. Now, once I've got my fleece and my pond liner, it's really important before I lay that I need to check the ground for any sort of sharp protrusions. In this instance, we've got the large acer behind us, which had quite a lot of tree roots that were growing through, and I need to make sure that I've snipped away any kind of sharp, sticky outy bits, which might potentially cause damage to the pond liner. And with that, you've got to take your gloves off and just get your hands, just work it all over the ground. And if you feel anything that's obviously sharp, get your secateurs and just give it a snip and chop away. You need to pay careful attention to all of the kind of vertical sides. That's going to be the most potentially damaging bit if you've got a sharp root sticking out, and obviously round at the base of the pond when you've got the full weight of the water on the pond liner, that's really important that you get rid of any sharp stones and bits and pieces. Yet again, it's another lovely day. I've been really spoilt this last week. As you can see, I've been working on my farmer's tan, so I'll stick the vest on and try and get rid of some of that. Well, I've just been to pick up all my rock this morning, and I'm expecting a little bit of rain. So we'll get this popped up so I've got a bit of shelter. Somebody needs to bring the pims. So this morning I popped into my local yard to select some stone for this job. I had intended on using Horsham stone for this project originally. This was sort of crying out for a more natural look, and Horsham stone tends to have the natural kind of riven surfaces, and it looks like a very nice natural stone and works very well with water. But my client already had an established York stone rockery here, and her pond in fact was already built out of York stone. So I wanted to go and see what I could find that was York related first of all. Now York stone quite frequently tends to have very blocky, regular, uniform sort of chunks of stone with quite flat surfaces, which can be a little bit boring. And I wanted to veer away from that if I could help it. But I'm very pleased that this morning I was able to find lots of riven pieces with various natural terraces and lumps and bumps, which will look very nice and tie in nicely with the established stone that's already there. So this is covered in dust and muck and dirt, and as usual needs to be jet washed off and well cleaned. Get that cleaned up, put the liner in the pond, and I can start to assemble the feature and get it built. Good morning, it's another day on the job, day 3. As you can see, yesterday I completed or carried on adding stone to the pond just to build up the sort of basic structure. It was a pretty miserable day, raining for much of it, so I didn't really get an awful lot of filming done. But this is just the kind of the initial bare bones of the pond, and I was toing and froing with the pond, with filling it up, draining it back down again so I could get an idea of levels and where the rocks are going to be sitting in relation to the water level. I'm happy with the general kind of theme of what I've laid here. So I'm going to drain the pond down again, and now it's going to be a time to start to fix and secure these stones. Now again, I'm going to be using the Awaza foam fix with my foam gun to fix all of this rock work, and as I work around in the process I can start to level up and neaten up some of these stones to get them in their final position. But it's coming on. A lot to do today. I need to try to assemble a form of a spill over this final stone over here. So it'll be interesting to see how that looks and how the stone reacts with the water and what it looks like. I'm still going to build up a couple of planting zones, which I might get time to do later on this afternoon, but if not tomorrow. But really start to reassemble the pond and turn it into a feature. So if you can hear me over the noise of the vacuum, I'm just draining the level of the pond down now. It's a really, really good way to be able to kind of ascertain what will be the level of the stonework and the levels of various aspects of the pond in relation to the water when you've actually got it filled up. Obviously when I'm laying stonework, I'm very conscious of levels, and I'm constantly using either a straight level or even a laser on some of the bigger ponds. But until you get water in the pond, you can never really gauge exactly where it's going to be. Now this final drain down, it's a bit dusty and a bit mucky. This is going to go to waste, and it will just go into the garden and water the plants. And the rest of the clean water within the bowser, the water I retained from the original pond drain, and probably a top up with a bit of tap water, will go back into the final fill. Incidentally, do you think the sound quality is any better? Let me know in the comments below if you think the sound is better with my new microphone. So this is the Iwaza foam fix that I'm using to bond and fix all the stonework in place. This is an expanding foam. I don't know if it's a specific aquatic expanding foam or whether other expanding foams will do the job, but essentially it's a non-toxic inert product which is safe to use with pond fish and other aquatic life. So in a situation like this where it's already an established pond and all the fish are going back into it, a relatively small volume of water, a very, very large quantity of stonework and what would be a lot of mortar if I was to be using a cement-based fixing would cause all sorts of problems for the fish. So we'd have to set up holding tanks for the livestock and they wouldn't be able to go back in the pond for quite some time. So this is a really, really good alternative to cement on small features like this, which will allow me to put the livestock straight back in as soon as the job is done. Now the can itself comes with a little straw as an applicator so that you can use the foam directly from the can and just give it a squirt. I have to say these are absolutely useless. Last year, of 6 cans that I purchased, more than half of them I couldn't even use because the straw snapped off inside the can and the whole thing erupted in a kind of an explosion of gooey foam. So that was a bit of a waste. So much better to use a proper foam applicator gun like this. You've probably seen me doing this before on some of my other videos, but you just essentially screw the can into the gun and off you go, getting trigger happy and squirting this foam all over the place. It's quite easy to make a mess with this. It will stain stones, it will stain your clothes. Last week when I was using this on a cascade, it looked like I'd had a dodgy tattoo sleeve all over my arms. They were just covered in black, and it took 4 or 5 days of scrubbing before it had come off. So be careful with this. In fact, today I'm going to use gauntlets, I think, just to make sure I don't get too mucky. But yeah, so the stones that I'm happy with, I will literally just start squirting around and adding some of this foam, and it will expand and increase in volume massively. So you don't want to go too mad with this. And after about 15-20 minutes or so, once the foam has started to expand out of the joints, if there's anything really, really visible, once it develops a skin over the top of the foam, you can start to manipulate it and push it back into all the cracks in the joints, fill some of the voids with a few more stones. I've got a bucket of what I call fillers, just some little bits of stone that I can use to prop up and level. I've got my level, my trusty filthy level, which gets stained and covered in everything, just so I can get an idea of the angle and the fall of the stonework. And then it's a simple case of getting the nozzle of the gun into all those cracks and joints and filling. Now this foam will go off and harden quite happily on wet surfaces, but it's not going to do so underwater. So having drained the pond down, the stone being wet and the odd little kind of puddle of water, that's not an issue. But I wouldn't be able to apply this underwater. It's amazing how tough a skin, how solid this is once it's fully expanded and hardened. I have to say I was quite sceptical about using such a way of bonding rock. It's quite big in America. You see a lot of videos on YouTube of guys building big ponds, you know, using this sort of stuff. But it does work. You can almost use it as a glue as well. You can put a splodge of foam down and then stick a rock on top of it, and that helps to hold it and stick it into place.
it doesn't help if frogs emerge from the cracks of the rock covered in foam. Just as well I've got water in here because he's now washed himself off. It's safe to say no frogs were harmed in the process of doing this video. Right, well, you don't need to see me do all of this, so I'm going to crack on and I'll show you the finished result. Now, once you've finished with your foam gun and you're done with using it, it's really important to clean the gun out. This is something that it doesn't tell you on the instructions on the foam fix, so I guess it's just kind of assumed that you know that you have to clean it. Obviously the exterior stuff, once it's dried, it's really easy just to peel that off, but you need to clean inside the gun, and you can buy pressurized cans of dedicated foam gun cleaner. I guess this is just a very strong solvent, not quite sure what the ingredient is, but this just gets screwed into your foam gun. Open it up and just squirt it through. And there we go. And that'll just clear all the components and the moving parts inside the gun. And make sure that you can use this again and it's not a disposable item. So as I said before, the foam really does increase and expand in volume massively. So you can see all of the voids and the joints, look, where it's oozed out. Now this is developing a skin. Don't be alarmed, it looks shockingly untidy at the moment. But once I work round with a couple of tools, you can use a little flat stone, your fingers if it's dry enough, but as I say, it does really make a mess. You can start to push and manipulate all of this oozing foam back down behind the stonework. Any areas that are, have really gone over the top, once it's dry, you can just cut it off. And then once this has been pushed back down, of course, all this then is covered in soil and none of that's visible. Does a very good job of fixing the rock. So what was initially really a pile of rock is now starting to come together. I always say it, but it's true. It really is the last day, the last few moments when you start to dress jobs like this, when suddenly it all pulls together and starts to look like a feature. So here, just concealing the edge of the lining at the front, bringing soil level up to rock level, a few adjustments of some of the original rockery stones down at the front here to change the angle and the faces so that they can act as more of a retainer. Putting a few little plants and alpines into some of the little nooks and crannies to soften the stonework. And now it's starting to look like a pond. But what's immediately obvious and what really detracts from it at the moment is the filtration system at the back. So this is a prime time to dig that up and to move it a little bit lower down the slope so it can be concealed with some stones in front of it. In fact, Awaza do make a sort of a fake rock cover which goes over the top. That sounds really tacky, but actually when you see it in the flesh, it's a darn sight nicer to see that than it is the filtration system itself, and it provides a little bit of cover as well in winter. So that's quite a good thing to do. But I'm going to crack on now and dig a little hole and resink that filter further back. Another day, and this will be all but finished. Start to look like a nice feature. So today's the last day on the job, and it's all the finishing touches and all the final little additions to complete the feature. So currently I'm filling all of the voids that I want to plant up as the marginal shelf. This is the main sort of planting shelf. I'm making sure I've got a depth of a good sort of 4 or 5 inches or slightly more of a fine gravel. This is just a 10mm shingle into which the plants can root into. And then I'm going to finish it off with a scattering of slightly larger 20mm gravel. This will need a good rinse before it's got its final fill. So whilst we've still got some mucky water in here, I'm going to fill the pond up with the rest of the retained water that I had, which is already a little bit mucky, and just rinse this through, empty it out fully with my vacuum, give it a good clean, and then refill it its final time with some clean water and the reserved pond water. This is one of my favourite parts when I'm finishing jobs, because to me it always feels like I've come to the end of the journey and I can see the finished job. And what a transformation it makes, just hiding that black, unsightly pond liner and replacing it with some natural materials. And once we get plants in here, it'll look even better. Planting shelves like this are really good for ponds for a number of reasons. One, cosmetically, it's much nicer having plants planted bare-rooted into purpose planting zones rather than just having them sort of precariously balanced in unsightly plastic baskets that end up overturned and falling in the pond. But also having shallows in a pond, particularly when it's a wildlife pond. So this is kind of a frog pond really. There's a lot of frogs in here, more frogs than fish actually. And wildlife, like frogs and other amphibians, really like to have shallows where they can spawn. And it's an easy access to get in and out of the pond for them as well. Now I shall put the marginal plants in these zones whilst the pond is empty. It's much easier to get planted up like this than when there's water in the pond. And that will make sure that I don't disturb the gravel and sort of send another bout of dust and muck back into the pond. So I'm not going to go too mad with the larger gravel just yet. I'll leave it like this until I've got this planted up.